Right. Okay. We're on lesson 9 now, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So the penultimate lesson, I think that's what you call it, isn't it? So we're carrying on this evening by looking at our canvas paintings. So I sent out a load of photographs before, all black and white, so that you can start thinking about adding in your own colours and things. And we've also been looking at some other artists that show the perspective, the atmospheric perspective, as well as lineal perspective. And we're just going to carry on working on these paintings now. Um, some people have got very large paintings, some have got much smaller ones like myself. Um, but we probably just need that extra lesson to carry on with that now. Right, there we go. All right, so we're going to continue working on our canvas paintings today. So I'm going to take us over to the studio and just remind you what I spoke about before. So these are a few examples of the kind of pictures that I'm looking at personally at the moment. So the picture that I've got is of a chap in a bar, and he's leaning against the bar. He's having a drink, and there is all the details of the bar in the background there, which are slightly blurred. You can make out the details. Um, but I was talking to someone today, and you don't need to have crisp detail necessarily in the background of a painting, because a lot of that detail can be recognized anyway, and the imagination, if you like, fills in a lot of the information itself when you look at a piece. So the main thing is that you want the details that are important, that are going to draw your attention the most, perhaps, to be the most in focus. So here we've got in the center here we've got a picture where you've got the diners that are closest to us most sharp, and then as we go into the background they become less distinct. So you're drawn from the foreground towards the background, and there's a very kind of white light area, which I'm not sure exactly what that is, to be honest with you, but I suspect there's something on a shelf like a bottle, and there's the edge of a man's shirt, and then some reflections and things. So that kind of takes you from the foreground towards the background of the picture. And then the picture over here on the left hand side, you can see that the waiter is in really good focus, and then the background has these almost indistinct marks, but you can still tell what the detail is. In fact, there's some diners towards the back there as well, that you can't see very well, but it gives you a sense of the light and the atmosphere. And then over on the other side, just over here, excuse me, we've got some really strong detail on the girl and on the taps. We've got the reflective qualities in there. And then if you look just above that on the shelf, how very pale, very sort of blurry it is, almost like you might get on a photograph. And if you look at the top there, we've got some very loose marks too. But your imagination, as I mentioned, can fill in a lot of that detail to make the picture work, and make it an interesting picture with sharper detail to draw your attention. Okay, so I'll take you over to my painting now. So I was working on this one last week. I've done a little bit more work on the face today, not much, because I was busy helping people during the lesson today. But I filled in this area. I spent a little bit more time working on this area to make it a bit crisper and so forth. I'm going to do that even more today, so that detail becomes the area that you're drawn to, as I mentioned before. And then in the back here, we've got all these highlights and reflections and things that you can see on the bar itself. So I'm going to be continuing to add these in. If we look a bit more closely at the photograph, you can see how the light coming through the window from outside perhaps is creating these very bright areas towards the back, and on the bar here you've got a glass, maybe a bottle or something, creating these reflections on here as well. So it adds interest, it draws your attention, but because it's less distinct, you're more drawn to the sharper areas of the face and so forth. All right, so things to remember that we're talking about here is because our photos are mostly black and white, we're going to keep the colour palette really nice and simple. So as you can see, I've got these purples, blues, there's a little bit of brown in there, because I've used a bit of brown mixed with ultramarine to create these blacks that you can see in here. So they're not actually black, they're actually like a nice deep brown. And then if we look over here on the reflection, you can see how abstract it becomes, but it does create that sense of atmospheric perspective that we've been looking at during this project. Other things you excuse me, my throat's giving out. But up here you can see that as last week I was applying some tissue paper to create texture. I put that a little bit randomly on there, but somebody today did a fantastic thing where they took some tissue paper and scrunched it up into the shape of a dress, which looked absolutely fantastic. It really created the folds of the fabrics and things that were on that dress. So you could do something with the tissue paper up here on the folds of the jacket, for example, to create an extra little bit of texture and interest within the picture as well. And it almost like maybe mimics the fabric that's on his jacket as well. So I'm going to be continuing with that this evening. I'm hoping to sort of refine the face a little bit more and maybe introduce some more colours into the background so we get a difference between the foreground and the background, but I'm going to see how it goes. Okay, so we're basically just continuing this evening with the work that we're doing. And of course, when and if you need help, I'll be here to have a look at your work for you.
Right, okay, so I've already started just here actually, but I spend quite a lot of time examining the portrait a lot closer. The idea of a lot of this lesson for me on this piece was to refine the details a little bit more on the face, and you'll see me working on the jacket as well quite a lot. The important thing is to look at some of the finer details and shadows, as I mentioned, but also to keep looking at the contrast in the picture as well, because I'd like that man to really stand out against the softer background, the blurrier background, so he's more sharper in the foreground, and he stands out. So you can see me working with quite a small round brush here, and I water down the paint a little bit too in order to keep a little bit of transparency, so that some of the work that I've done underneath will come through. And as you know, acrylic paint dries really nice and quickly, so by the time I come back to different parts of the picture, they should already be nice and dry and ready for me to carry on adding more layers, which is one of the beauties of acrylic paint. So I spend again quite a lot of time refining, as I mentioned, the jacket and things. So I'm looking for highlights and shadows, and to make some areas a bit crisper, like the edge of the collar, and work back into the details of the hand. There's not a lot of detail on the hand in the photograph, it's quite pale and things, but there are some very subtle shadows, so I do try to put some of those in. And we've got a little bit of the jacket just here coming out of the shadows, so you can see I'm using water and the paint to blend, but as you can see, the colour from underneath, the fact that it was already dark, kind of resonates through there, and even though I'm adding a highlight, it creates a little bit of depth because the paint is slightly transparent, so you get the colour underneath coming back through the highlights as well. So there's a little bit of the hands going in there. So often you'll find that as you work on things, you need to touch them up, go back to them, revisit them, because you do notice things that perhaps you didn't notice before when you go back over things. And you think, oh, just need to tweak that little area or add a little bit more to this area and so on. So it's not a case of, I mean, with experience you can know a little bit more and make things easier, of course. But often looking at new things, new objects that you haven't worked with before, you spot things as you go along and you think, I can see this shape's not quite right, or the tone and shadow or the colour needs changing a little bit. So it's a constant re-evaluation and observation of what you're looking at as you progress through painting a picture. So you can see he's looking a bit sharper now. At the bar there, he's looking a bit more detailed and crisp, or whatever you want to call it. And then in a short while I shall be working a little bit more on the background. I'm gradually just working my way around here. And I do use more than just a purple here. I'm using, to get the shadows particularly, I'm using ultramarine and burnt umber, and that creates a nice deep bluey black sort of colour. So there's no black paint on this picture whatsoever. It's just all burnt umber and ultramarine in this case. You can see the highlights on the canvas there where I've added some water. Because it's speeded up, you'll see it disappear and things as I'm working. And just then I was emphasising the colour again by putting in some of those shadows, creating a little bit more contrast. So once you're kind of happy with the proportions of the face, it's quite nice just to have a little bit of a tinker around and emphasize highlights and shadows a bit more, because it gives it more form and brings it out of the picture a little bit more. So here I just decide to loosen up a little bit, and I'm using the palette knife to really loosely sketch in some of those light areas in the back, and obviously you can see now the dark areas too. I don't do a lot of this because you can see I've already moved back into the brushing, because I was using brushing around the central area of the picture for the background, so do the same thing again here. So I just slowed this down a little bit because one or two students have just said, oh, I'd like to see it a bit slower. So it is speeded up, but you can get more of a sense of the way that I tackle things, I guess. You can see me mixing the colours and just changing things around. I'm not being overly precious about how I'm doing things here. I have my palette of colours on here, so I can't go too far out anyway. And if I do, as you know, the great thing with acrylic is you just work back over it a little bit later, or you can scratch back or even wipe the paint off while it's still wet. But it will dry nice and quickly and you can work back over it, which is something I really enjoy doing because it gives you the flexibility. So I don't get quite as far as adding extra colours in this lesson, although you can see there's more of a blue in there in the background. So I have introduced a few colours, but you'll see in the next session that I do add quite a lot of different colours, and we look at some other artists to help us do that as well. So really this, the way that I'm approaching this is quite enjoyable, because it's about just playing with the paint and seeing what happens almost. So whereas you saw me being quite detailed and refined with the jacket and on the man and the face and so forth, here I'm letting go a little bit and just working in a very different way. So more purposeful brush strokes in almost like an abstract form. So I'm looking at, I constantly still, even though it's like this, I'm still constantly looking back at the photograph to get an idea of what I'm actually painting, but I'm also giving myself the creative flexibility just to play and do some different things that perhaps I haven't previously tried out, which is to bring in some of my own ideas and marks into the background to create that blurry effect that we've been looking for and that I showed you earlier in those example photographs of paintings from bars. So still on the old atmospheric perspective idea, not on lineal perspective so much. There is a tiny bit there, but a lot of fun. You'll see me turn my brush over occasionally and use the back of the brush, and that's just me. I like to sort of scrape in marks as well while the paint's wet, and you'll see me do that in the next video as well. So obviously the video's speeded up a little bit. Hopefully it's given you an idea of me slowing it down. I've started to get the on the bar there, I've started to put some of the reflections in, but later on in the next lesson I'll work quite a lot on improving that. And I bring in some yellows and some more blues and turquoisey colours into this too. So I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. If you've got any questions, please just post below, and if you've enjoyed today and you've just come across me, please follow or subscribe. Thank you.